There were huge explosions when the bombing, the invasion started, and things from that moment have never been the same.
I just want it to end. If it ended tomorrow, I'd be over the moon. In 2021, attention really turned again to Ukraine. Everyone was talking about the possibility that Russia might invade, and there was a sort of seesaw, in my mind anyway, and I think in lots of people's, of will they, won't they?
After massing troops on the border for months while denying plans to invade Ukraine, Russian President Vladimir Putin recognizes the independence of two breakaway areas of Ukraine's Donbass region, Donetsk and Luhansk.
À ce moment-là, j'ai compris, lorsque j'ai entendu ce discours de Vladimir Poutine, qu'il allait attaquer, qu'il allait y avoir une grande guerre. Cela confirmait ce que me disaient justement mes sources parmi les mercenaires.
I arrived in Ukraine with our team on the 23rd of February, not really knowing what to expect, because obviously the situation was extremely tense, but nobody specifically expected that war was about to break out the next day or even in the days after that. And then at 4 o'clock in the morning, we were all woken up by sirens and were told that war had started.
Мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции. Призываю вас немедленно сложить оружие и идти домой.
Woke up, looked at my phone, missed calls from the France 24 newsroom and news that there were attacks all over Ukraine. The biggest surprise to me was that it wasn't even just Kiev, it was even places to the west of Kiev. So there was a feeling of real shock and also fear because I could hear the explosions outside, and I felt like I should probably try to interview people in order to be able to tell during my lives what people were saying, but it was almost like a formality to just hear somebody tell me that they were in shock and didn't know what to do, but I knew that that was how everybody was feeling because that was how I was feeling as well.
You know, the armed forces were trying to get themselves together. There were roadblocks going up. People were trying to think if they were going to leave, how long were they going to leave for? You know, what would they have to take with them? There was real confusion, real panic.
We have been under attack to the east, to the north, to the south. Solidarity will be at the heart of what we do today.
The sense of panic in the early days, that quickly disappeared because the Ukrainian armed forces had managed to turn the Russians back. The mood in the country was changing. There was a real sense of resilience. People were beginning to think that they could actually win this war. That the Russians had bitten off more than they could chew. Everybody seemed to come together at that moment.
And I saw people in various towns and cities throughout Ukraine mobilizing in a way I've never seen before, literally running with supplies for civilians, for the armed forces, people signing up to go to the front lines, people doing whatever they could, donating blood, giving food, people that became galvanized to a great extent and mobilized overnight. I think some of the human stories are clearly what's marked me the most in this coverage. I remember we were up in Kharkiv in March, quite near the beginning of the war. That city was coming under intense shelling, and we went to one of the worst bombed out neighborhoods. And there we met some quite elderly people, Ludmila, a grandma who was basically living down in the basement, terrified day and night as her building was coming under shelling. Making those human connections really brings the reality of the war home.
Ночью сегодня очень было страшно. И сегодня целый день.
There are so many things that have marked me. I mean, really, there are so many stories that I've been in tears when I've been editing them, and so many things that people have said to me that I find just very distressing, very moving for all sorts of different reasons, because of people's terrible suffering, also because of people's astonishing courage, bravery and energy. One thing that I remember really marked me at the beginning of the war, also because I think he spoke for millions of Ukrainians when he said this, was a guy in Lviv. He said, "I can't believe that I would ever have said this, but when I see pictures of the corpses of dead Russian soldiers, I feel joy." And I think that is one of the most terrible things about this war, is that the Ukrainian people, because they're under attack from these Russians, they really hate them, and they really want to see them dead, you know. And these are people who never thought that they were people full of hate or full of violence.
It is difficult. You know, we're hearing terrible things, we're seeing terrible things, we're seeing people live through distress, and I'm not gonna lie, it is difficult. You know, sometimes when we're filming, so I film as well, that's like a barrier, I guess. That's one of the ways we journalists protect ourselves, and to kind of put a one-step distance. But it's difficult to keep a distance when you see people really affected, and you see people whose lives have been destroyed, whose realities have been turned upside down. I mean, it's part of the job, but it's not the easy part of the job.
المراسل الصحفي أو الميداني في ساحات القتال يعني لديه علاقات مع الناس، وبعد ذلك يرحل عن هذا المكان تاركا وراءه عددا من الأشخاص الذي قضى معها فترة ما من خلال تناول وجبة غذاء أو الحديث أو شيء من هذا القبيل. ولكن المحزن أنك تعود أدراجك ولكن الآخرون يبقون في ساحة الحرب، وهذا أمر صعب نوعا ما إنسانيا.
Throughout Ukraine, authorities are documenting violence as they build a case against Russian forces for war crimes and potentially genocide. Mass burial sites have been found in several parts of Ukraine, reclaimed from Russian troops. France 24 reporters went to Bucha, a town on the outskirts of Kyiv, in April 2022, after the bodies of 458 civilians and prisoners of war were found.
I wasn't there when the initial discoveries were made. I arrived shortly afterwards in Bucha, and I went to some of the funerals afterwards, which are extremely moving. And one of the things that really, I think, struck us more than anything about the horror of it was that the priest who was there to say the prayers on the burial for the bodies that had been found was so alone. There were no relatives there to mourn with him, no friends at all, just the priest, all by himself. And they didn't know the names of the people they were burying. That was very, very moving, very disturbing.
Meanwhile, in Russia, the government continues to sow disinformation as it tries to control the narrative around the conflict in Ukraine.
Je pense que personne à l'extérieur de la Russie ne prend réellement l'ampleur de ce dont on parle quand on parle de la réalité parallèle russe. C'est lorsque c'est noir et tout le monde dit que c'est blanc. Et lorsque vous dites que c'est noir, vous vous sentez vous-même comme étant quelque part dans le faux parce que vous êtes dans cet espace où, en fait, la réalité n'a juste plus aucune importance. Le cœur du problème aujourd'hui en Russie, c'est de ne rien pouvoir dire qui soit vrai, à moins de risquer 15 ans de prison, tout simplement. C'est en cela qu'on a un rôle à jouer très important pour essayer de faire passer l'ampleur de ce drame et l'ampleur de ce qui est en train de se jouer.
An awful lot gets lost in the fog of war, and particularly in a war like this where the propaganda effort coming from one side, the Russian side, is so immensely strong. The power of the Russian information machine and propaganda machine is colossal. So we play a very big role in being there and being honest about what we see and providing a testimony to what is happening.
The best way to kind of fight against this information war for me is always field reporting, is to go out for ourselves and see what's happening, to ask questions, to look at a scene, to take footage, to investigate. This is how we fight against the information war.
As far as I'm aware, the plan is to carry on sending people from Paris and having me there. And I'm very glad that we plan to keep on covering it as intensely as we have been doing, because obviously this is a hugely important event, not just for Europe, but for the whole world.
Мы хотим мира, мы хотим добра. Мы желаем самого святого, чистого, что заслуживают наши народы. Есть две национальности, есть люди и есть нелюди.